You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
You're listening to Fantha Tracks. Flip through the galaxy of literature. Welcome to Canon Fodder.
You're listening to a very special episode of Canon Fodder. I'm Mark Newbold, and joining our host Chris Davies today is Lydia Kang. You'll know Lydia from her writing in the Star Wars galaxy. She wrote the Right Hand Man short story from The Empire Strikes Back, Certain Point of View, back in 2020. She's currently riding high on the wave of Cataclysm, part of Phase 2 of the High Republic. Chris and Lydia sat down for a chat all about Cataclysm. So here's Chris Davies and Lydia Kang discussing the latest entry in the High Republic, Cataclysm.
My name's Chris Davies, and I'm joined today by the latest author to join the heartbreaking High Republic team. It's Lydia Kang. How are you today? Are you okay?
I'm doing very well. Thank you so much for having me here today.
So welcome to Star Wars. Your first Star Wars book was the latest adult High Republic novel, Cataclysm. So would you mind sharing your personal history with the franchise and what it means for you to write your very own Star Wars story?
Sure. So, wow, my personal history goes back to my childhood. So, it's interesting how I think some younger people today, they grow up and they can sort of choose what different fandoms they wish to really immerse themselves in. But like with Star Wars, because, I'm a kid of like the 1970s and the 1980s, it was always there. Like there wasn't a choice. Like it was the first movie that I saw when I was 6 years old, followed by the other movies. They were always on TV. I was always watching them whenever the rerun showed on television. For some reason, they were always on at the holidays. So for us, like, Thanksgiving and Christmas, Star Wars was on in the background and I was watching it because that was the best thing to watch on television. Yeah. It just really kind of insinuated itself into the culture of the pop culture of my life. Just as I grew up. So it was just always there. There was never not Star Wars in my mind, in my memories. So I was offered the opportunity to write a short story for one of the From a Certain Point of View anthologies.
Yeah, of course. It was the Empire Strikes Back one, wasn't it?
Exactly. And so they offered that to me, and I'd been writing several books by then. I had written some science fiction in the young adult world. I'd written a lot of historical fiction and other stuff. And so when they offered it to me, I was a little bit like, why? I didn't actually ask them that. It was more like an internal conversation I was having, like, why are you inviting me to do this? Like, this is such a big deal. So that was my first sort of invitation into the world. And I was really quite nervous and scared to write about it because I knew that there were so many sort of internal rules about Star Wars that I was going to get wrong. Like I knew that I was going to. Of course,
yeah. It's a crazy canon, isn't it?
It is. There's so much, right? And it's overwhelming, even for somebody who's like a fan like me, but who isn't maybe somebody who has read extensively in the Star Wars universe, somebody who hasn't watched every single streaming, everything that's ever come out. So I felt like in some ways, like I was afraid I wasn't going to be good enough, that I was going to somehow get quizzed on this stuff. And if I didn't know the right answer to something, I was going to get like, they're going to rescind my contract. But there was a lot of, I felt like I knew that the fans are so devoted to Star Wars in ways that are just really intense. And I thought, if I do this, I have to do this well. Like they gave me an opportunity and I'm just going to write something and it's like, oh, done. I was like, I was so nervous about doing a good job on it. And so I put a lot of work into it and it was well received. I was really happy. Yeah. The anthology was wonderful. It was so much fun to read. And
it's such a good book. That one is.
Yeah, it's a great one. And then that was it. So I was sort of like, okay, like a feather in my cap. I wrote in the Star Wars world. I wrote some dialogue for Luke Skywalker. It's just incredible. Just incredible. And I thought I was done. And then like, a year or two later, they reached out and they were like, would you like to write a novel in the High Republic? And I, once again, was just like, are you sure you have the right email? Like, are you, what? Are you sure you want to like, okay. And I was incredibly nervous about it. I was also, once again, it was just like, again, scared. I was like, it's one thing to write. Now that I'd written a short story, I was like, well, it's one thing to write short story. It's another thing to write, a full length adult novel. Yeah. So I was very nervous. I was very worried about being able to do a good job. I did not want to let anybody down. I didn't want to let down the other High Republic authors or Mike Siglain or anybody who was working at Lucasfilm, someplace behind the curtain who was just like, maybe we should ask Lydia. I don't know who that person is. I didn't want to let them down. So, so a lot of work went into it, and it was a tough book to write. It was most certainly one of the hardest books I've ever written. So no question that it was a challenge for me.
But I found it quite interesting that they approached you for the Empire thing. That must have been quite humbling, like, to have that.
It was humbling on a lot of levels because, I'm a mid-list writer. The young adult stuff that I had written that's in the science fiction world, they were very small, quiet books. They didn't make a whole lot of waves. And I was writing a lot of adult historical fiction, which is completely the opposite of Star Wars. I mean, we're not talking about a galaxy far, far away, which is, in the future, but not really in the future. And I'm writing historical fiction. They're murder mysteries. They're just so different. But those were doing quite well. But they are not Star Wars. They're nothing like Star Wars. And so I just didn't really understand how it happened that they found me. If maybe like I'd gotten enough of a reputation with my writing that they were like, okay, let's give it a shot. I have no idea. I'm going to keep it secret. Like, I actually kind of don't ever want to find out at this point. I'm just like, let's keep some magic there forever.
I imagine with the historical fiction, imagine that there's some similarities in a way that it's about the details, I imagine, as well, that sort of pepper the background.
Yeah, you're right. It actually is, because in a lot of ways, when you're writing Star Wars, you're writing historical fiction, and right? Because it's an entire world with a whole set of rules, with a whole set of really complex histories, so many different people doing so many things, lots of wars, lots of battles, lots of political strife. And it's a complicated world, just like our own history is, right? So, and there's a lot of details, the really tiny details about things like fabric choices, or eating, like what they're eating, or how they would say certain things. So in a lot of ways, you're right, it was really similar. And it didn't occur to me that they were some skills that I had until I was doing it. And then I was like, oh, okay, I kind of get this.
Well, there's been the massive controversies in the book world with small things like lightsaber colors, or those kind of things that
yes.
in broad strokes don't really matter at all. Within the canon, the fans are going to notice those things. So I imagine your certain skill set probably did pay off in that way.
I think it was helpful, but it also helped that there were many people who were in this process that were helping me. People who were like, helping to do editorial work, who were double checking facts and things like that. And so I did have that to lean on. So, sometimes if I'm not sure exactly, if a planet even exists at that time, I can ask a question and it can be answered for me. So I did have access to that sort of knowledge that was incredible. That was pretty cool. That was super cool. Like, ask and you shall receive. And it's anything in the Star Wars universe, and like, you will get an answer. So it's pretty cool.
Well, there's literally people's jobs, isn't there, just to keep it all in order. So there's a whole story for people.
And, yeah, exactly. And what a great job that is to have. But I took advantage of that when I needed to, for sure.
No, absolutely.
Hey, this is Daniel Jose Older, and you are listening to Fantha Tracks.
I think I'm correct in saying that your book launched on the first day of Star Wars Celebration.
Close to it. It launched on April 4th. So it was.
I think I might be confusing because I'm in the UK, and I think it launched in the UK on the 7th. I think that's.
Oh, maybe that's what it was. Yeah. In the US, it launched on the 4th, but it was the same week.
I mean, how was it though to have the world's greatest book launch party, and how did you find the fans?
I actually said that when I was on the stage and we were talking about the High Republic. I was really nervous, as I was like, oh my God, I have to say something clever. What am I going to say? And I'm just sort of like, smiling. And then it sort of hit me. I was like, this is the best book party I ever could have wanted. It was incredible. And I felt so lucky to be here. And I felt so humbled by the fans and the enthusiasm and the love for this world. And to be part of it right when my book was coming out was absolutely incredible. I'm just like I still have the hugest smile on my face just thinking about, that moment. And I remember saying it, and there was just this roar from the audience, kind of like, we are with you. We're at the party. Congratulations.
Yeah, that room was crazy, wasn't it? The High Republic panel.
There were thousands of people in that room. I was so amazed. It was just a beautiful thing to see, just that sea of like happiness, right? Yeah. Over books. Like, where else in the world, as somebody who writes books and, living in a world where sometimes people are just sort of like, books are dying, blah, blah, blah. Seeing that enthusiasm for books, it just makes your heart swell. It was wonderful.
It must have been quite like immediately gratifying as well, because I imagine a lot of the people that were in the queues for the signings and things like that that were buying Cataclysm were just excited to read it, not just to get the signature, just to read it because it was the newest, along with Cavan Scott's Path of Vengeance. They're the two latest ones. So I imagine it must have been quite gratifying to see people's excitement to read your book like straight away.
It was wonderful because, like, at the Forbidden Planet booth and also at the Del Rey booth, whenever I would drop by or I was doing something, they would say, Cataclysm is like flying off the shelf. Like, people are just buying it like left and right. And I had so many people who came up to me and they're like, okay, so, I bought the Goldsboro edition and then I have, I have like the edition, for Celebration. So that, the yellow edged ones and the blue edged ones. And I have my one from the United States, but I brought it over. But then when I was like flying over, I listened to Cataclysm. So I have the audiobook. So they bought it 4 times. Yeah. And I just looked at them and I was just like, thank you so much for showing so much love. And I don't think I've ever had that before where someone purchased 4 copies of my book in different formats just because they just had to have it. And that was like, wow, I loved it.
It was quite an experience celebration. That was it. It was my first one as well. And I actually did get to meet you at the High Republic meetup outside. I had a quick picture taken with you, which was nice.
Oh, good. Yeah, it was. So what did you think of, how was Celebration for you being the first?
Take me back. Do you know what? I mean, I know this is probably a little bit informal for an interview, but when you spend so much time online with Star Wars fans, you see a lot of negativity, and you start to think that that's what the fan base is. Celebration really opened my eyes to think that actually, no, that's just a vocal minority. The majority of Star Wars fans, it's all positive. It was all love. There was such a nice atmosphere there. And I found it really, really moving as a Star Wars fan, to be honest.
Yeah, I found it really moving too. I just felt like there was just this constant drumbeat of joy the whole time we were there. And I knew about that sort of vocal minority that tends to be very talkative about many things, and they actually really they scare me. They make me very nervous about
same to be honest.
Getting things done, doing things that they're going to disagree with and that sort of thing. And you must have a little bit of that nervousness too, because you put content out there and you are it puts you in a vulnerable position because you're putting out opinions and things like that. And so I was nervous about that, and that is none of what I got at Celebration. Again, it was just happiness. It really was. It's a perfectly apt title to a convention, is Celebration, because that is exactly what it was.
Well, that's one thing you'll find actually. The Star Wars book fans, whether it's online or as places like Celebration, they generally are one of the more positive areas of the fan base. The book fans will always be, especially the High Republic fans, they are crazy and they are there's nothing but love coming from them. So at least you've got that. At least you're not making Star Wars video games. That's a whole lot more of a negative area.
Oh gosh, that's a whole other kettle of fish. I suppose so. And the High Republic readers and fans have been absolutely lovely. I love them all back. Their enthusiasm and for the books has been just blown me away. It's been amazing.
This is Adam Christopher, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
Seeing people dressed up as the Path of the Open Hand at Celebration, that blew me away. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, I know. That was incredible. I also saw Marta. I saw the mother at one point in time. Like,
there was someone as Chancellor So.
Yeah, she had her stepped companions. I think I have a picture of me hugging one of them because, and it was funny because she had run out of stuffing, I think, for one of the animals, and so it kept flopping over.
Yeah, so basically, the book fans love the High Republic and they love your work.
Yeah, it's just wonderful. It's been really amazing. Like, of all the things that I could have written and entered into the Star Wars world, book-wise, like, this was just fantastic.
So stepping into the High Republic midway through Phase 2 must have been a daunting task, because so much has been publicized of the conception of the initiative and the brain trust of the original authors. What was that process like for you, and how did you find that experience?
The process was long and detailed, and I can't go into all of the details of it, but suffice it to say, these books do not happen in a vacuum, and it does really, truly take a village. So, I was oftentimes talking to all the other Luminous authors, the original story architects. I was chatting with Cavan Scott a lot, with George Mann, obviously with Zoraida, because Zoraida in writing Convergence, like I had to constantly check in with her about like, what are you doing here? And what's going to happen here? Because I need to make sure that things match up. Things like, there were a lot of meetings, a lot of chats. Sometimes they were really weirdly timed chats because Kevin and George are in a completely time zone than us. And so I'd have to make sure, oftentimes sometimes they would be like texting or on our Slack channel. And I would be like, you really should be asleep. Like, I know how far ahead you're, like 6 hours, 7 hours ahead of me because I'm in the Midwest in the United States. And I'm like, you ought to be sleeping. And they would be like, you're right. We should be sleeping. But they would be there like answering my questions, or we would be problem solving things. So it was really collaborative, and it was pleasantly so because these are wonderful people to work with. They have such great imaginations. They know exactly what you're going through. And so all the stresses that happen with writing any book, honestly, like writing any book in the world is a stressful endeavor. It's not all just like, you looking out your window, sipping your cup of tea and thinking, oh, lovely, I'm going to write another paragraph. This is great. It's a struggle. A lot of it is because it's hard work and you're trying to do a good job. So having them there and they know exactly what you're going through, that support was invaluable. It was incredible. Like I always felt like I had somebody at my back. And it's a roller coaster. So you have like these really great weeks. You've got these like terrible weeks, depending on what's going on in your life, in the book world, in publishing, and personally, and then they sort of like, they all get it. Like, they're just like, yep, no, we understand. And you're going to be okay. You're going to make it through this. So it was just, I felt so supported, and everybody on the team that I have worked with, from Del Rey to Lucasfilm to Story Group to the Luminous authors, like all the support staff. I mean, just so many people. They are all just lovely, kind, thoughtful, enlightened people. And there is like no better office that you could work in than surrounded by people like this. So I feel incredibly grateful and very lucky to be working with a group like this.
Cataclysm is obviously a direct continuation of Convergence, but it also weaves in threads from other books and comics and the Battle of Jeddah audio drama. Firstly, I have to say that the way you handled all those threads and brought them to a climax whilst telling your own story was very impressive and the highlight of the book. But how do you even approach something like that when you've got all of these different sources? Obviously, you just said that you got to speak to the other authors and all that, but I imagine that you have to just go back and read everything constantly. And
first of all, thank you for the compliment. It is sort of the hope, right? After you finish something like this, that people are like, you wove it in and you did it. You were able to do it. So that was the goal. A lot of these things are, I'm just checking in with Kevin. I'm checking in with Zoraida and George to make sure that all the threads are matching up. And we had to do that quite a bit. Sometimes the threads did not match up. So I, unfortunately, for example, I had forgot that we had decided that in the Battle of Dalna, it was going to be raining. And so I'd written the entire Battle of Dalna and the Night of Sorrows without a drop of moisture. And, and then I realized very late in the game that I had screwed up and I had to fix all of that. And let me tell you, adding weather to a battle is not as easy as saying like, this is wet, this is muddy, it's raining. It changes everything. It changes your attitude. It changes your emotions, like the character's emotions. It adds it's a whole other character that you're adding and weaving into the story. So that was not easy to do. And it's kind of funny.
Especially as Geller as well. There's the whole flooding aspect of it.
Oh, yeah, exactly. And so, it was a totally it's just really funny because it was a disaster on my part. Like I totally had screwed that up and I was like, sorry, my bad. I will rewrite this. And I had to make that happen and make it work. But yeah, so that's just sort of an example of like what happens when you don't pay attention to all the threads that need to happen. You make these like catastrophic mistakes and you're like, you got to go back and fix them in breakneck speed. But for the most part, all the other stuff, the threads, they did come together, but it's quite a bit of work. It's like, there's a lot of coordination and there's a lot of discussion happening and checking and double checking and triple checking and quadruple checking to make sure things actually work out okay. So that's one of the things why I said, this is probably one of the most challenging books that I've ever written because, usually when I write a book, It's my idea and I sit with it and I just take care of it myself. But there's no discussing with anybody. It's just you are the entire architect of your story. And here, even though I'm one of many architects, even though I'm writing the story and I own a lot of what happens in this story, and that I created many characters, I decided what was going to happen. There are many threads because Cataclysm is tied to so many other stories that just cannot be written completely in a vacuum, right? So luckily, the communications were really, really good, and it made it easier, but it was still hard. It was a lot of work.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video, and social media feeds, bookmark fanthatracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
You probably had to coordinate with Cavan Scott more than anyone else, because I've just finished Path of Vengeance, and that pretty much takes place around about the same time as Cataclysm, doesn't it?
It does. So you kind of understand why I was talking to Cavan a lot, right? And I have been trying to refrain from saying that out loud too often because I don't want to give away too many spoilers. But yeah, Cavan and I talked a lot because we had to make sure that everything was matching up okay.
I mean, I noticed that throughout the book, I mean, this might have just been me, but the theme seemed to be partnerships or duality. Which of the duos did you enjoy writing the most, and why was it Gela and Axel?
Oh my gosh. Only a slightly leading question. Gela and Axel, that was fun. And I knew that was going to be one of the main dyads. I mean, look at the book covers, right? So it was going to be one of the main dyads that I was writing into the story. And so this is where me and Zoraida and I we were talking a lot, because I needed to know how she was going to leave these two at the end of the book, and what unsaid things and unresolved things did they still have, and how are they going to deal with them. And so I had to really sit with Gela for some time about what mistakes did she make in Convergence that she's going to make it so that she feels like she can't trust herself. She's a Jedi. She's very, very well trained. She should not slip up with these simple little, getting a little over emotional or getting a little mad or whatever. She can't let those things, slip her up and make these big mistakes. And yet she has this blind spot when it comes to Axel. And
I was just about to say the same thing.
Yeah, she just said, and I wanted to sort of dig into that. Why do you let this happen? Are you trying so hard to give somebody a second chance because you believe in them? And is there something more going on? And with Axel, it's sort of he has so many opportunities to do the right thing, and he keeps screwing it up. You have to write him in a way that doesn't make you lose faith in him completely, right? But he totally does that. He really throws you off kilter. You think that he's going to do something and he doesn't. And that sort of rogue aspect of him where you don't quite have control over them. They're just sort of this, you just don't know exactly what they're going to do. I like that instability in story writing, but it is very frustrating as a reader, because you're reading it and you're sort of you want to smack the book and be like, stop doing that, stop doing it. And that's our goal as the writer, is to get you so frustrated that you want to throw the book into the corner of the room, but then pick it up and turn the page and find out what happens next.
Well, Star Wars fans are going to be used to that, I think, because obviously we've got Han, but I think the biggest comparison, Axel, he's kind of like a High Republic Coruscanti version of Dr. Aphra, in the fact of just so chaotic. I mean, the mother calls him my chaos, doesn't she? They're not too similar. They're different enough to be unique and interesting, but there's a lot of similarities there, I think.
It was a joy to be able to play with that. It was a joy to figure out how Axel was going to develop as a character over the course of the book. And I did not want to make it ever easy. I didn't ever want to make it obvious, for him. I know that your favorite dyad is Gela and Axel, but one of my favorite dyads is also Axel and Kyung and his mother, right?
Yeah, because, that's brilliant.
And it's a really complex, very painful relationship that they have. And, instead of just sort of leaving it as is, we're just going to sort of unpack that and make it even more uncomfortable as much as possible, so that Axel really has to deal with a lot of these sort of ghosts in his closet, these skeletons in his closet. So that was probably one of my favorite dyads, was Kyung and Axel, for sure.
Especially when she becomes a giant badass at the end of the story. That bit's pretty great.
Oh gosh, it was so much fun. I just loved it. I loved it. And I wrote, there was that scene where she's gardening in her hothouse, on Coruscant. And she yells, "Get me some pants," because her beautiful gown snags on some thorns. And we had cut that from a different scene. And I was writing to Tom Haler, I'm just like, I'm keeping this quote if it kills me. And I made sure that I had an opportunity for Kyung to yell, "Get me some pants," someplace in the book, because I was like, it was just such a perfect little comic / developmental moment for her.
Obviously, Axel's on the cover, and I never really thought of him as the central character of the book, but evidently he is, because another relationship that I found really fascinating in that book was Axel and, is it Binot or Bino?
Yes.
I pronounce it.
Yeah, it's Binot. But, and I have a tendency to say Bino because I learned French in high school, but that's actually not how you pronounce it. So I pronounce it wrong in my head all the time, but it's Binot. So yeah, and they have this, it's always interesting to me when you have relationships in stories where people are such good friends, they're practically brothers. But it's always like, but are they really?
No,
where do you draw the line between like how good a friendship is and like how much do you really know this person, and do they truly have your best interests at heart? And so that was, Binot was fun to create and to write him, because he's just not a good guy.
No, I mean, I kind of got those vibes. It kind of seemed like he seemed almost like an ex, an ex of Axel's, but from a toxic relationship.
Yeah, and like you can always tell Axel's always trying to say the right thing around him. He's always trying to do the right thing around him to sort of like try to impress him. He almost like the big brother that's like cooler than he is, and Axel's always like sort of trying to be the friend that he thinks Bino thinks he should be. And I think it is a terribly toxic relationship to have with anybody when you are constantly trying to impress that person or trying to be the person you think they want you to be. And I think that's also something that he struggles with his mom, and he's always failing. He does the opposite. He's always being the person she doesn't want him to be. And that's his way of also kind of expressing himself or trying to make his way in the world.
Validation in all the wrong places.
Absolutely. And, and then meanwhile, there's like Gela, like perfect Gela, who's sort of like, do better, Axel. And so he's got these influences that are just really hard, because it's one thing to be pulled in a direction, but when you at your core don't know who you are, you let yourself get pulled, but then you just don't know. It's like this really tenuous thread, and it's so easy to get pulled in another direction because you don't have that solid core. And that's ultimately, Axel's journey, is finding out where is the adamant, like where is that solidity of knowing who he is and what is actually self, right? And so it takes him a long time to sort of figure that out. And unfortunately, there are a lot of traumatic and horrible things that have to happen before he gets shaken to the core and realizes like what kind of person he wants to be. And, Cataclysm, it's funny, that's right under his face there, but it's what happens to him. It is internally, it is an experience that so many characters have on the page. The Cataclysm is not like just a synonym for the Night of Sorrows. It's what happens within so many of the characters as they progress through the book. And getting to that moment and then realizing like, what are you going to do? Are you going to let it destroy you? Are you going to be able to take another step forward?
Yeah,
absolutely. The title ends up being very perfect in so many ways.
I mean, like, again, let me just congratulate you, because the way that you handled Axel, I think, was particularly good. I remember when I was starting to read it, I was like, how are we going to get Axel back into this story in a convincing way? And also, Axel's you've got such a unique voice. I was like, will Lydia Kang be able to capture it like Zoraida did? Super well done.
Thank you.
And obviously, I imagine there's a lot of pressure there as well, like we said before, because people really love Axel.
I knew immediately, like as soon as Convergence came out, like the fandom just sprang up, and it was sort of like so much love for Axel. There is this one really funny line where Oren is like, he's like sort of talking to Gela about him, when he's sick on Piper, and she's sort of like, he's very charming. Like you have to be kind of careful around him. And he's like, yeah, I think I have a crush on him already. And I wrote that for the fandom. Like I wrote that because the fandom has such a crush on him. And I wanted Oren to feel the same way. Like, he's just such an alluring character that you kind of like, you love to hate him, but you also hate to love him, but you just want to be near him all the time because he just exudes this sort of wonderful personality. It's just like Han, not that it's not the same thing as Han, but it's like this sort of,
he's like a mix of Han and Lando.
Yeah, a little bit, right? Yeah, just like it just confounds you, and yet at the same time you're sort of like, let's have more Axel, please.
I mean, well, Phase One obviously had some wonderful characters, but it's known for its big events, disasters, and all that. And Phase Two, obviously, it has those big moments, but I think the real star of Phase Two is its characters. I'm not saying they're better than Phase One's characters, but to me, they really stood out. And I think the absolute best ones, in my opinion, the ones that the fan base has really embraced, is Axel and Marder. I think Marder is another one that I don't think people will be able to forget after Phase Two that ends. You didn't really get a chance to write much of Marder, so
Nope.
But speaking of the villains, like we said, been up before, who do you think is the scarier villain between Martian Rowe and the Mother? Because I know what my answer is.
Oh gosh, that's a really good question. I think the Mother scares me more.
Same.
Because I think that Martian, like, he kind of wears his heart on his sleeve. You kind of know what he wants. You kind of know what he's doing. You kind of know how he feels about everything. And he acts in a way that it makes that obvious. With the Mother, she holds a lot of this close to herself and she doesn't reveal it to everyone. And that makes her a wild card. So that makes her somebody who, like, you could be her best friend and then she could just slash your throat at a moment where you feel like you guys are like the best of friends. And it's that wild card part of her that makes her incredibly lethal, I think. So definitely. Between the two of them, I think it would be the Mother for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think Martian is an incredible villain, but he's obviously a more traditional villain. Whereas the Mother, she's just unhinged. She's not someone I'd invite round.
Yeah, she's like unhinged, but she's outwardly not. She's like incredibly put together and like in total control. But there is a whole series of like, there's like a ticking time bomb inside her that she lets nobody know about. And you're sort of like, you just don't know when the bomb is going to go off. You don't know who's going to be the victim. You don't know if you're going to be alive at the end of it. And it's so it's fun to see, Beanot like interacting with her. And you can tell when he's with her, he doesn't feel like he's on solid ground. And I love that feeling around her that where you just don't know. And like, there's another scene also with Axel and her. And it's exactly the same where you're sort of like, just when he thinks he's like getting a little confident about, what happens, like it's sort of like, don't be confident, Axel, like you're going to get burned. And, but you can read that in her, that sort of, it's really, it's quite terrifying. But if you don't know what you're up against, it seems like she's in control and she's got a plan and you know what the plan is and you know what your place is in the plan. But behind the scenes, I think the reader is very aware that like, it's not that easy. It's not that simple.
No. And she's got huge Charles Manson vibes as well.
Oh, yes, she does.
So that's never good.
No, it's not a good thing. It's not a good thing. The entire, path, the whole time you're sort of like, some of this kind of the Force should be free, gifts freely given. And then the other part of you is like, but not where it's going. It's sort of like totally. So the path was a fun creation.
There's been cults in Star Wars before. Some people would argue that Jedi's a cult. And I don't know if you read the Alphabet Squadron trilogy, there's a cult in that, which is quite similar. But there's been nothing quite like this.
Hey, this is Daniel Jose Older, and you are listening to Fantha Tracks.
What Star Wars book would you recommend everyone read? You can't say this one, though. And if you could write any Star Wars story, so dream scenario, what would it be?
So my first two answers would be, and this is like really terrible because it is a little bit self-serving, but it would be read Path of Vengeance when it comes out, because it is truly the final book in Phase 2. And there are a lot of questions that people have been asking me about Cataclysm that can't be answered in my book that will be answered in Path of Vengeance. And then the other thing would be, even though there are a huge number of High Republic fans, I would say that if you are getting really excited about Acolyte, and you are getting really excited about a lot of the stuff that's coming out, like, Dawn of the Jedi, is read Light of the Jedi. Like, get started on Phase 1 and start to immerse yourself, because it's been such a great entrance into the the High Republic for people who are newer to Star Wars or sort of like don't know exactly where to start. But like Light of the Jedi was like, I was completely blown away by this book and getting into the Star Wars universe. And I'm not terribly well read when it comes to the extended universe. So that was a book that I had read and really just felt like, okay, I can see why everybody.
You could pick that book up
so
having
excited.
never read a Star Wars book before, couldn't you?
You could pick it up and not know anything, not know a whole lot about Star Wars. Like maybe you've seen a couple of the movies, not even all of them. Like, and you could get into this and you could just fall in love with what's happening. Bloodline is another favorite.
But if you could write any Star Wars story, dream scenario, what would it be?
I would write a Rey story from when she was a teenager or when she was like 13. Like I would write a little adventure story about her being on Jakku and still wondering about her family. And she comes like, she can fly the Millennium Falcon. She can fix the Millennium Falcon. She can fight. She learned all of that on Jakku. Somebody taught her these things. And I would love to see that evolution of her. So that would be my book that I would love to see.
There's a book, I don't know if you've read it. It's called Before the Awakening. It was released as a tie-in to The Force Awakens. And it has 3 short stories in it. It has one which centers around Rey, one that centers around Finn, and one that centers around Poe. And the Rey story is kind of that. It's only a short story, so it's only a small portion of her history. And it's set on Jakku, and she's trying to do up an old junk ship to sell it to get more portions and stuff. But that's a really wonderful story. So if you like that idea, I definitely recommend picking up Before the Awakening. This has been awesome chatting though.
Yeah, it's been so great talking. I really enjoyed this. Thank you so much for having me on your show. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much for joining, Lydia. Everyone go and read Cataclysm. Is there any of your other books that you'd like to plug?
If you were interested in the history of medicine for any reason at all, you could pick up Quackery because it's one of those books where if you have the attention span of a gnat, you can literally read just one page and get something really interesting out of it. And if you want to know how I fictionally kill people on a regular basis, my historical novels, I would say probably the most popular one is Opium and Absinthe, because it takes place in 1899 and it's the same year that Bram Stoker's Dracula is released in the United States. And the main character becomes obsessed over whether or not real vampires are killing people on the island of Manhattan in 1899. So that was one that I really loved writing. Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Lydia Y. Kang. You can find me on my website, lydiakang.com. But I'm around, so come say hi.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to this very special episode of Canon Fodder. If you want to be a part of the action and stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news, visit fanthatracks.com or check out the free Fanthatracks app through the App Store to follow us on your mobile device. You can reach out to us and send in your listeners' questions by emailing radio@fanthatracks.com. Comment, like and share on any of our social media feeds at Fanthatracks, and be sure to subscribe, leave a review, preferably a 5-star one, on Amazon Music, Audible, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcatcher or smart speaker of choice. And as always, thanks to Mark Daniel and Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers. Remember, tune in to Good Morning Tatooine. It's live Sunday evenings at 9 o'clock UK time, 4 PM Eastern, and 1 PM Pacific on Facebook and YouTube. And check out our Fanthatracks Radio Friday night rotation every Friday at 7 o'clock UK time for new episodes of The Phantom from Down Under, Planet Leia, Desert Planet Discs, Start Your Engines, Collecting Tracks, Canon Fodder, and special episodes of Making Tracks, and every Tuesday at 7 o'clock UK time for your weekly episode of Making Tracks.
Coming up next on Fanthatracks Radio, it's Making Tracks.